it's not always immediately obvious who the person is that's going to reach out to you from the other organization. And it's not always the decision maker that ultimately reaches out. And frequently, it's not the decision maker. So,
Mm,
this is something that we've experienced in multiple different industries. The referring party or the person initiating the process is not always the person that has the final say. So I think that it's helpful to approach this conversation because that person needs a little bit of support because it's an intimidating conversation to have, and they
mm.
need a little bit of help, perhaps encouragement that they probably will be the one that's necessary to initiate this, and maybe a little bit of guidance in how to approach the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting because I come from a 36-year history and background in psychotherapy, and in that case, when you and I used to work on that business, we actually created and adapted the website in such a way to invite family members or loved ones to contact us as well. And I'm finding the same thing as I focus in my coaching business now on family owned businesses, that it's oftentimes not the decision maker who initially reaches out for contact. It's been, in fact, the last two family owned businesses that I've been involved with here recently. One was a daughter who he didn't even was not involved in the family business personally, even lived out of state in a different state, but she had had some conversation with her mother, I believe, and her mother was expressing how painful it was, that her husband would come home and had these issues in the family business. He'd be upset about it. Sometimes they'd even argue, and she reached out. She wondered who could help, and then found me as a family business coach online, took a look at my website, and then reached out. So my initial contact, my initial couple contacts, was with this daughter, really just getting a sense from her about her concern about her dad's family business, and some of the interactions of family members in that business. And so I ended up doing yeah. So let me just stop there for a moment. So yeah, so that was an interesting, it was an interesting case.
Well, the angle that I think is interesting about this that I want to touch on a little bit more is in the past we've talked about strength finders and Myers Briggs. The person that initiates the conversation, I find, doesn't usually have the most dominant personality style.
Mm,
So
mm,
they have to they have to approach other individuals on the team that maybe have a more assertive or aggressive personality style because they're more focused. The one that reaches out is more focused on uh, caring and harmony and community. That's why they want
mm,
these
mm.
issues to be fixed within the company. So, because that's their strength, and to not have this other element of being super assertive. So, given that that's the case, how should somebody that isn't super assertive approach a conversation with somebody that has held a more dominant position within the company or within the family unit as a whole?
Yeah, that's a fantastic insight, first of all. And the second case that I was thinking about this morning actually was a case where the this is also a daughter, right? And a brother reached out to his sister in this situation. And they've done it before, right? They've had a couple of times, and the daughter is more like a from the Enneagram. She's really probably lines up with the peacekeeper on the Enneagram. From a Gallup's Clifton Strengths Finder, she probably lines up, just like you said, with harmony, relator, and there's one other piece in there, in that dynamic that probably fits for her as well. And so they harmony folks value harmony, right? They value things being balanced out, things being peaceful. It's difficult sometimes for peacekeepers. They're often the ones folks turn to in times of stress in family businesses. This has happened in both these cases that I'm talking about this morning. And for a peacekeeper, they're very much conflict avoidant kinds of people. It's really unsettling for them to consider kind of moving into the family dynamic in a way to assert a need for resolution or reconciliation amongst family members. So that's one of the first things I talk with them about is just um, first I talk with them about the pain, what they're seeing and how painful it is, how it's painful for them, and then for their family in the business, and kind of get that rolling. And then I talk with them about their conflict style and some of the benefits of properly ordered conflict, right? A step by step process where we see a good resolution or a good cooperation in some of those situations in family businesses.
That's very interesting. So this individual is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. They want
Mhm.
harmony. They want the relationships to be well in the business, but in the short run, they might have to have a crucial conversation and have to create a little bit of tension and a little bit of potentially disagreement in the short run to get to the long run goal of achieving a better state.
Yeah, and it's kind of reminiscent for me as I sit here this morning talking with you about this. It reminds me of when we do interventions with drug addicted folks, and how I might prepare the family members to be able to talk to that person in the most successful way for the best outcome. So it's not dissimilar, right? In family businesses where we've got a concern about one or more family members in the business, we've observed behaviors or heard about behaviors. We then have an emotional response to that, which is usually sad or scared or worried, and maybe frustrated or angry as well. And so I take folks like these folks that have contacted me, and I work with them around developing the right kind of intervention, right? The right kind of message that can really get through to a family member that might need to hear it. So I'll coach them around, what have you observed? How has that made you feel? And if you could have anything that you'd like to have surrounding that conflict, what would it look like? So that they can then become better prepared, sometimes even rehearse with me a script along those lines in such a way that when they take it to dad, who might own the family business, they might have a better and successful outcome. And oftentimes then that leads to dad getting directly connected with me, and then we get to work on some of those personal and business matters at the same time.
From my perspective, it seems to be these conversations that are pretty tricky like this. It seems like, let's see, how do I want to divide this out? I would say that there's some clarity issues, and then there are definitely some emotion issues. And
Hmm.
underneath the emotion category, I tend to see safety in the conversation as being a really important element for having that conversation to move forward in a productive way
Yes.
versus that conversation devolving into like an argument that ends in gridlock or possibly frustration. So I know that you've done a lot of work with helping people maintain safe conversations. So do you have any
Yes.
advice as it relates to that?
Well, I'll give you just a scenario. I did really kind of a mediation session between a father and son who both co-own a business, and I started out with humor. And just making things a little bit lighter for the two of them. They had had some previous interactions that were very hostile, and very, I think, really in the end, very frustrating and saddening to both those folks. So I started out with humor. The next piece that I did was I asked them. I said, you guys have been together for the son for your whole lifetime, and dad since 28 years now. This kid's been, tell me something about him that's extraordinary. And so I get them really reminiscing a little bit about the relationship prior even to the business, and what some of the qualities were that they really really adored about the other person. And by the end of that, they were connected. There was a level of intimacy in the conversation, and they were laughing together as well. Then we moved into the agenda. and from a fun, humorous, connected place. It felt safe enough for them. And then we had, and this was their third try. It was their first try with me in a mediation session, but they had tried two previous times, and it had gone very unsuccessfully. And they're not done yet. They still have work yet to do. But their first interaction with me, based on this kind of this recipe that I just outlined here, really was very successful. And at the end, there were points of agreement, and still yet points for us to consider in a next session, a next coaching session. But does that give you a sense of how I might start the process?
Yes, and also you're kind of priming their mind to be focused on the outcome that we really want. Because we
Yes,
can get down into the minutia, into the arguments and the little
yes,
battles that we have, but the outcome that we really want is for this business to be a viable, thriving thing, and
that's right.
for the father and son to have a positive relationship together. So
Hmm.
you're kind of moving that stuff to top of mind, and that's the frame through which we're going to have a conversation. Not the little conflicts, but
Yes,
that is the North Star. That is what our outcome is. That's
yes,
what we're trying to
yes.
achieve here. So I think that's a fantastic approach.
Well, and what you say, what you add to that, Aaron, is super important, and that is to begin with the end in mind. And what I did with each of those folks that I just referenced here is I talked with them individually about their hopes, wishes, and dreams for their relationship and business together. And then when I started the talk with them together, then I spoke more. I just referenced those conversations and was able to say, "You guys really, amazingly, as frustrated as you have been, really want similar things, maybe even the same thing." And that outcome then was, and I said the obvious, but it was important for them to hear that in the end of that mediation session, here's what you both want, and that's what we're going for, and it's pretty similar.
Personally, when I'm entering a conversation like this, it's not uncommon for me to go so far as to actually write down what specifically I want to happen and what specifically I don't want to happen. And that way it helps me stay grounded to that. And a lot of times what I want to happen might be an outcome. It's whatever the successful outcome is, and typically we need to have a cooperation to get to this preferable outcome. So the other thing that I'm trying to do is to not elicit an emotional response out of the other person. And this is the more
Mm.
challenging part, at least for me, because I don't know, maybe I tend to be a little bit provoking. I'm not sure, but for me to be really aware to not be, to not put in any jabs, to not, and also sometimes we can trigger people when we're not even trying. It's sort of just the
Mm.
the nature of the conversation might be triggering in and of itself. So looking for warning signs that the emotional state is changing. And the two things that I typically look for are when people go to silence or violence.
Mm.
So if
Mm.
somebody goes quiet in the conversation, that's usually a sign that the dialogue is shutting down, and
Absolutely.
we might
Yeah.
not get to a satisfactory outcome. Ironically, sometimes when people just give it to you, like they just sort of agree, but you know that they're not really agreeing. They just want you to shut up. They just want you to like
Hmm.
stop bothering them about this.
Hmm.
And then the other one is the opposite response, where people become hyper assertive and aggressive. Like you can tell that they're expressing that emotion through anger. So I don't know. Do you experience that as well? That you're paying close attention to like those fight or flight responses and whether somebody's shutting down or turning on the fight response?
Yeah, I'm a natural tuning fork for dissension or for conflict or the vibration going up higher and higher. It's also my job in the introductory sessions when I'm doing maybe the individual sessions with family members in preparation for sitting down together to have a talk a session or a mediation session. It's my job to really assess the kind of person that I'm sitting with. Is this kind of a conflict avoidant peacekeeper, somebody who may tend to stonewall or shut down, or even sometimes shut down his own needs or opinions in the face of conflict. And so I might see that person. You described that person pretty well a moment ago. And I might see the other person. In fact, the situation with the father son that I just referenced, the session that I had with them, the dad is more laid back, let's say. And the son's more, the son's amazing. And some of the fun for me in doing this work is I get to work with so many unique individuals. And so in this situation, the dad was pretty laid back, kind of like you might have described in your assessment. Then the kiddo is like Mach 2 with his hair on fire, right? He's wears his feelings on his sleeves. He's super sensitive person and can be reactive. And so getting to know them in the individual sessions was helpful to me in the first mediation session because of that. I didn't want to lose the dad, and I didn't want the kiddo to eat him, right? Like lunch. And so I'm continually monitoring for those subtle cues. And sometimes they are subtle cues, sometimes not so subtle, right? You got somebody who shuts down, or you got somebody who amps up. And I started that session. I forgot to say this. I started that session with some abdominal breathing exercises, and it was only for maybe a minute and a half. But I did it right at the very beginning of the meeting, and what that did was it grounded each person, got them centered, and got them feeling a sense of relaxation and peace. Which, when we're that way, we know that the prefrontal cortex, the ability to think and solve and compromise, that's online. One of the things that happens when we get too amped up, or we become emotionally flooded, is the amygdala takes over. And in that state, it's, fight or flight. Or shut down, or that you're going to get from somebody. And so that doesn't do us any kind of good at all. It's okay to be passionate and excitable if that's the way that you're built. And it's also important in sessions where we're doing some mediation or trying to find a compromise in perspective. It's also important to be as calm and relaxed as possible in the process, so that we can get to the solutions from the prefrontal cortex. We won't get a good solution if the amygdala is in charge. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It seems that we have a tendency to go one way or the other. And we got to make sure that we keep ourselves balanced in these kind of situations. So if you're the type of person that tends to go to silence, you got to remember that you're not actually going to work through this if you stay in silence, because you're going to
Yes.
quietly still hold that grudge, or you're not going to actually find an agreeable outcome. And then conversely, the person that's hyper aggressive or dominant, that they have to uh, tone that back. And then I do tend to agree with you also that the like aggression and assertiveness doesn't necessarily mean that it's hyper emotional. So
Hmm.
I do tend to think that keeping the emotional state low in general, even though somebody that is able to be an emotional person, that can be an asset in some situations, you do need to have access to your higher levels of thinking to get through these more intricate conversations. So the more that you can keep yourself sort of in a relaxed state of mind, the better.
Absolutely, and I can speak from firsthand experience with that piece. I am an incredibly sensitive, hypersensitive, even passionate individual. And years and years ago, I've been in my own family businesses now for about 27 plus years, and when I see a need and I feel passionate about it, I want to drive it home. In conflict with my ex business partner and Christine, my ex wife. She was more the kind of the naturally calm, highly intellectual, and I was the naturally passionate, riding high with energy. And you can see where that cannot go well. and I think the proof is in the pudding, though. I got better results with Christine in that first business when I was calmer, when I attended to her strengths, which is high intellect, when I brought examples and observations and concrete facts and data to the conversations, the compromises went much better as I understood and respected her style. And she of course knew that I'm a pretty amped up kind of guy, and so from firsthand experience, I can talk about the benefits of being able to sit in a calmer place when it comes to resolving something that's super important to you.
Yeah. Just another example of a situation where I had to do this. It was definitely one of these kinds of conversations where I really wanted a certain outcome, and I knew that emotions were going to get high both directions. This particular call, it was a video chat and it was a group chat, and the way that I kept getting comments from one of the people in the chat, it was really aggravating me because I felt like they're like very mostly passive aggressive comments, but it was borderlining on aggressive. I could feel myself like getting aggravated, and what I did is essentially I don't think that it was a situation because it wasn't me that was talking. It was one of our team members that was talking. If I was in active dialogue, I might not have been able to do this as easily, but I shut my camera off and my camera and my microphone, and I did exactly what you're talking about. I sat up in my chair. I took a few deep breaths. I reminded myself of what we need to happen in this meeting. And then I reminded myself what kind of communication is going to get us there and what kind of communication is going to move us further away from that. And then I rejoined the meeting, and then I engaged. But I was wanting to jump in for our team member, because I felt, and something that triggers me more than anything is feeling like one of the team members is being attacked. So I wanted to jump in and defend this person. And I'm like, let me take a few deep breaths and think about, I am going to jump in, but let me think about how I can jump in the most effectively to get us to the outcome that we need.
Had you jumped in previous to take it? So you took a break, a literal break, turned off your camera,
yes,
got into some centering and grounding breathing for yourself, asked yourself a couple questions. What do you predict would have happened had you not done that?
This is the fascinating thing. I believe in business, we talk all the time about like a 10% ROI. You get a 15% ROI. That's a great return on investment. Good versus bad communication, the ROI is so much bigger. The difference is like they're polar opposites. So they're not even like it's an infinite return. In one situation, you can have something extremely negative or something extremely positive, and it solely depends on the communication that happens in that meeting. So the outcome was that the thing went our direction, that we were able to communicate through this, and I'm recalling what it was right now. And let me try not to put too many details in, so I can't give away
Sure.
who I'm talking about. But we're working on a web page, and we're updating a web page for a branch of a company, and the web page was really low converting. It was a really bad web page, but they had certain things that they wanted to stick to, and these individuals, they didn't have very much experience with design from like an aesthetic perspective or design from like a marketing conversion type of perspective. So it was really aggravating me because we have people that's what they do, that like, and that we kept getting shut down with things that are not even really, they're not your main considerations when you're building a web page. So, I just kind of had to relax. Then what I did was, instead of me engaging that in a one-to-one conversation, and you're right, I probably wouldn't have come to this conclusion. If I would have just fired back, I would have fired back right directly at the other person about how they don't have any experience when it comes to web design. They don't know anything about aesthetics. They have no credentials. So why would you even be telling me, but I
And
didn't do
and
that.
even, let me stop you for a moment. And everything that you just said would have been true,
Yes,
but
yeah,
it wouldn't have taken the conversation in the right direction,
it would have
right?
been 100% true and entirely ineffective. Yes, yeah. So what I did after those that deep breathing that I did, I rejoined the call and I basically engaged the rest of the team because
Mm,
I didn't want to get into this power struggle. So I started asking people on the team what they thought about the web page and what they thought about what could be improved about the web page and what the team thought about some of the additional considerations that we. And then once it was coming from them, and and on the team there was the CEO was in this meeting. There was a number of people that were at similar level and higher level to the person that I was having a conflict with. So it was much easier to ask this individual what they thought about their team members' input or what they thought about their boss's input than me just saying the things that I was thinking. So I basically
nice.
I asked other people to articulate it for me because it was pretty obvious that something needed
Mhm.
to change with that page. It was a really important page for this website. It was important for a particular type of conversion that they needed. And no, I would
Yes.
not have come to that conclusion if I wouldn't have taken a break and recentered and refocused on what was important.
Fantastic example. Yeah. And so I am constantly on the lookout as I lead a session like this. I'm constantly on the lookout for what I call the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I'm looking for defensiveness, even in posture or tone, right? I'm looking for criticism. I'm looking for stonewalling, and I'm looking for contempt. Now, three out of these four things are completely normal, right? And I might give you just a second, a little pause here to ask yourself which of those four are the most dangerous.
I can only pick one.
Which one?
Um, Maybe contempt.
Yeah, yeah, and you are right on the money with that. Yes. So it's completely normal in a conversation where something's at stake for us. Our hearts are involved. This is a family member that you're talking to, and it's so common for folks to feel defensive, to act defensively, to become critical, to sometimes stonewall or just kind of shut down in the process. But contempt, when I start to see contempt in an interaction, what I immediately know is there's history here, maybe even more than what we've talked about as the agenda items in for the meeting. That there's a history here, and that history has been negative enough that somebody has begun to have the what I call the residue of resentment. And when folks move into a contempt conversation, then we really start. That becomes obvious fairly quickly because there's more hostility. Oftentimes, at the very least, there's more character assassination. So
Yeah.
now I'm not just talking about what needs to change in the business. I'm talking about another person in a very negative way.
And so is that the reason that you typically start off a session, perhaps with something like attitudes? Priming
Yeah.
somebody's mind with what do you like about the other person? Does
Yes.
that like
Yes.
increase the probability of having an emotion like gratitude versus contempt?
Yes. And I just like to call it, and I use this in several different areas in my coaching, but certainly in when I'm doing a family coaching meeting between two or more family members, I call it reminiscing, right? If there's a residue of resentment, we're still reminiscing, right? But we're probably reminiscing about really negative things. And so I just ask folks, and I prime them in the individual sessions to prepare them for the conjoint session. In the individual sessions, I talk about reminiscing as well. I also get a good sense of the history so that I might be able to predict ahead of time if somebody's got resentment that's built up over the course of time.
Well, we're approaching the end of the podcast here.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that one thing that's really important is for the individuals that have a little bit of a difficulty being assertive and
Hmm.
perhaps they're super agreeable.
Hmm.
I encourage you to move past that discomfort And sometimes you have to be disagreeable in a very thoughtful way to end up in a situation where everything can be a little bit better. So you can't be too afraid to approach the conflict. If you're too afraid, it won't happen. And you're the one that can see it. So we need you to have that bravery and to come forward and to do it in the best way possible.
Yeah, and those folks are usually the ones who feel the tension in the family between family members in the business, or the family will naturally turn to them. When they're in trouble in their relationships in the business, and they'll say, "Please help us," and they won't necessarily know how. And I can help them know how, but I also do what you just said, Aaron. I help prepare them in a way where they can begin to see positive outcomes coming from difficult conversations. And I think some of the things that brings hope for somebody that's a peacemaker is to know that in the end we're gonna grow, we're gonna heal, and we're going to have a better functioning family and then a better functioning business as a result of some difficult and challenging conversations.
It was a great conversation today, Dave.
Yeah, as always. Yeah, can't wait to have our next one.
All right. Well, I appreciate you and have a great day.
You do the same.